Ken Trahan with Lenny Van Gilder. It's our first NBC Bank Weekend Review, brought to you by First NBC Bank, with 35 locations throughout Southeast Louisiana and the Florida Panhandle. That's First NBC Bank, proud sponsor of SportsNola.com. The Saints suffered their worst loss from a point differential perspective in the history of the Sean Payton era, along with Drew Brees, of course, as they got beat by 33 at Washington, D.C. by the Redskins, and all kinds of record numbers being established, and as a result, the onus falling on the New Orleans Saints defense. And that leads to the possibility of a change at defensive coordinator. Published reports saying that Rob Ryan will, in fact, be dismissed as early as today from his position as defensive coordinator. Given the bye week, Lenny, the timing is there if you want to make a change. So I think most people are certainly expecting that to be the case at this point.
Well, you would think. I mean, Rob Ryan's seat has been very warm really ever since Dennis Allen was brought in as a defensive consultant, or exactly what his title, senior defensive assistant, whatever the case may be. You know, that this could be, this could be happening. And of course, that was on the heels of last season. Well, this season has not gotten any better. You're in the bottom 2 in the league in yards allowed. You've been, really, not a good defense, even in games that you've won. Of course, point to 2 weeks ago. It was a 52-49 game that you won. The Saints are on pace to allow, really obliterate a record for opposing passer efficiency. So it's, all the things you don't want to see out there, or what's been out there, and then you turn in a clunker of a performance on the heels of the bye week coming up. If you're going to make a change, this is clearly the time to do it, right at the bye week.
No question, and if it was a Johnny-come-lately situation, you can understand why people would have angst about it, but the Saints' defense was awful last year under the same defensive coordinator. And with all due respect to him, the Saints have had a bunch of injuries this year on defense to key players, but the guys they have on the field are simply not getting the job done. No way, no how. The numbers don't lie, and that's why the Saints are in the position that they're in right now. That said, Lenny, it doesn't exonerate the offense from responsibility. They were awful in the second half after coming up with big plays in the first half, and realistically, any chance the Saints had ended when they couldn't convert a 3rd and 1 and a 4th and 1 on their first drive of the second half.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you didn't have Mark Ingram that series. He was a little bit dinged up in the first half and wasn't ready to come back out and play at that point, so you're giving the ball to C.J. Spiller, and Tim Hightower, who's playing in his first NFL game in 4 years, which ordinarily would be a great story in that he's, battled back, from these debilitating injuries to get himself back on the field. But that's just in that spot, you could certainly lay blame to the backs, but at the same time, you got to be able to block up front as well. And, it continues to be a problem, especially, with the running game, to be able to really get anything going. They did some great things there in the first half. Ingram popped a 70-yard run, the longest run by a Saint in, I think since the 2004 season.
Correct.
So it's, there were positives, but it's just not consistent, and that's what's concerning to you.
Yeah, he also had an 11-yard run, but the lack of blocking consistently in the run game, and maybe even more of a concern in the passing game, is an issue. Drew Brees, stitches in his chin last week, got knocked all over the place by Tennessee, and he got drilled again, and his helmet got dislodged in the game yesterday, and he got knocked down several times once again, so that continues to be a problem. Just an overall bad effort by the Saints in a very difficult circumstance now because they're 4-6, and realistically, looking at the numbers, 9-7 put you on the outside looking in. It doesn't look like that's going to get in at this point. 10 wins would be the mark, and to accomplish that, you've got to win out, and let's be honest, that's not going to happen.
I don't see it happening with this team. I mean, it's not. I don't see the level of consistency that could produce a 6-game winning streak coming back after the bye. So, at this point, Minnesota has continued to establish themselves out there right now. What I think Green Bay and Atlanta would be the wild cards. They're both sitting there with 3 losses, and you're at 6 now. A win over Atlanta in Week 17, you'd have the tiebreaker over them, plus close the gap one more, but you still got to make up 2 games in there somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And the schedule, not that tough, but then again, as I wrote, the schedule wasn't tough going into these last 2 games. The fact of the matter is the Saints have some bad teams left on the schedule, but the Saints aren't a good team either. It's that simple. Moving on, there was good news for Tulane. They won a game at Army. It was painstaking to watch because it was tough to see some of the things that happened, including a dribbled punt snap, a block punt for a touchdown, mishandling a kickoff, an interception, missing an open receiver or 2, blowing a 28-7 lead, blowing a 31-24 lead late. But all that said, they got the drive they needed to win the game, You feel good for Tanner Lee in particular, playing with a broken finger, and you feel really good for Andrew Duraco. To me, he's the quiet story of the season for Tulane. Because last year, he was much maligned by his own standards. I'm sure he would tell you he wasn't any good. Kicking game was awful, and this year he's 7 for 7 on field goals, 22 for 23 on extra points. That's quite a turnaround.
It is, and yeah, to put it on the foot there. Part of me is thinking there in that last series they're trying to go down the field is you got to take a shot at the end zone here, and instead it's almost like they're setting up the field goal. That's a lot of confidence to put on a young man who's never attempted a kick in that situation, at least in college, and he drilled it, right down the middle, and good for him and good for this Tulane program. That's look, they faced a gauntlet there in October with 4 really, really good teams in a row, all of which have been in the top 25. They really could have beaten UConn. It was awful conditions to play in. Nobody could hang on to the football. You won pick 6 in the game. It's a 7-3 game. To get this, and look, now you go to SMU, an SMU team that's won 1 game the whole year. You got a chance to win another, and come back and maybe finish up, with a Tulsa team that's got a lot to play for potentially, coming home on Black Friday. So, let's see if Tulane can finish up strong. That was certainly a positive sign.
I purposely split up talking about the Saints and LSU. I tried to bridge the gap, if you will, because it's not very pleasant to talk about LSU either. They got whipped. Same story. They got whipped up front on both sides of the ball. There's no other way to analyze this game. They're not good enough to overcome playing from behind. Their quarterback has regressed. He's an average guy. I think we know that now. I don't think he's going to get much better than that, frankly. We've seen enough of a sample size. Have you heard this before, LSU fans, about quarterbacks? Leonard Fournette, he had a couple of good runs, but not his fault. Again, they got whipped up front. And again, they had a blown secondary assignment to give up a big play. Lenny, this is who they are. It's not an exception. It's systemic. We know who they are now. They're not as good as we thought they were.
Well, I've been saying for a long time here as we sat here on Mondays, I didn't think this defense was as good as we were making them out to be. They've been giving up points to teams that they shouldn't be giving up a decent amount of points to, and now all of a sudden they're getting into these physical type games, and they're having to go toe to toe, offensive and defensive lines, and just not seeing the type of performance that we saw the first 7 games of the year as a result of that. And you're right, this is not a team that's built to have to play come from behind football. This is a team that's built to get the lead and then maintain the lead by just grinding it out and continuing to wear you down. And when you get in a hole like that, it's tough to come back.
They had one good drive, the hurry-up drive, and they got the touchdown. Of course, that took a deflected ball into the hands of Malachi Dupre to score, but at least on that drive, they showed they were at least capable of throwing the ball. But when you don't work on something very much, that's what it's going to look like. And that's what their passing game looks like. It looks like something they don't work on a whole lot. And more than that, Lenny, they don't have a short passing game. They can actually throw the deep ball pretty well. So could Jennings. But they don't have a short passing game, and that's where you live. To move chains, keep the ball, and keep people on the field defensively.
Yeah, and the one thing that puzzles me is how Leonard Fournette is not a bigger part of the passing game. You and I both saw him in high school. You a lot more than me. He was an outstanding receiver in high school. You could swing him out the backfield. You could run him, you can run him on the, the routes out in the flats. You could, get him in the middle of the field and give him an option route, whatever. And he was really capable of doing that. And I don't know if they don't want to expose him to that or what it is, but, and obviously he gets an incredible amount of, bodily abuse just running the ball as much as he does. But you would think if he was a part of the passing game, that would perhaps open some things up out there.
Pelicans are what they are, a one-win team. They got beat again in New York after losing at Toronto. Made a run in the fourth quarter, couldn't sustain it, and lost again. Anthony Davis, a really good game, but that's pretty much the story. They can't keep people on the floor, and when they do, they're not good enough to finish. And I hate to say this, but they're going to become irrelevant pretty quickly here unless they go on a 4 or 5 game win streak, Lenny, in this conference.
They need to. And right now you're 8 under 500 at 1-9. I think at bare minimum you've got to be right around the 500 mark, probably beyond that if you're going to, be a playoff team. Now, look, this was a team that was 3 games out of the 8 spot with 10 to go a year ago and came back and did it. I think they're 4 out of the 8 spot right now, somewhere around that. And, there's still a long way to go. We're talking 72 games to go. But you got to start getting some guys healthy and getting back on the floor and developing some chemistry. They do have 3. This has been really a road-loaded schedule thus far. They've got 3 games at home this week. problem is you've got San Antonio coming in on Friday. That's one of the three. So that becomes a part of the challenge as well. It's just the teams you're playing, and they're playing the toughest schedule in the league over the first 2 months of the year. That too is part of the challenge, but you got to play the hand you're dealt.
And finally, high school football, big week, of course. We've got the second round or quarterfinals, depending on which classification you're talking about, coming up this weekend. And Sports NOLA and WHNO will be a big part of that. We'll have some announcements forthcoming here in the short term about both WHNO and Sports NOLA. So stay tuned for that. Sports NOLA TV, 6 p.m. Monday night as well, with Ricky, Brian, and yours truly, and we'll have a lot to say.
Yeah, it should be entertaining. That's the thing, unfortunately, when you've got teams that are struggling a bit, it does make for some interesting banter out there, and I'm sure you'll have it.
It does. We look forward to it. We hope you do too. Lenny, have a great week.
All right, see you later this week.
That's our first NBC Bank Weekend Review, brought to you by First NBC Bank with 35 locations throughout the greater New Orleans area and beyond. That's First NBC Bank, proud sponsor of SportsNOLA.com. He's Lenny. I'm Kenny. Have a great week, and God bless you.